Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we're in part two with our good friends Eric and Rabbi Ephraim from Israel. And we last time, if you haven't listened to it, is go back and we talked about what exactly is happening in Iran, what's causing the protesting, what is the protesting, and what are some of the implications of that. We're going to get into much more discussion about that. But to start with, actually, Eric, you are in Palo Alto, California right now. Been there for, looks like, about a month. What are you doing over there? And then Denny's got a great question about sources.
My wife and I came to the United States on the 8th of December, and we arrived in LA, and I rented a car, and we took 2 weeks to go see the national parks in Utah and Arizona, crisscrossing between the states. And then I took my family, my 3 daughters and my grandsons and son-in-laws, and we all went to Kona, Hawaii for a week.
Nice.
And spent a week in Hawaii, like a big family vacation. And my wife went back. This was now around a little before New Year's, maybe December 29th or so. I went back to Israel, and I hung around. I'm visiting family, and I was raised in St. Louis, Missouri, so I have family there. So I went to visit them, and now I'm in Palo Alto visiting friends. And I have very good friends in Grass Valley, evangelical friends from college. Spend time with them, and now this now Wednesday our time, and in 2 days I'll head back to Israel.
How was your family trip in Hawaii? How'd they like it?
They loved it. My 3 daughters now want to do this thing every other year. So
yeah,
that's great.
Come on, Dad, take us to Hawaii.
But it's great, these things are worth spending money on. Family, family is very important.
Yeah, building memories. That's exactly right. Well, I know Denny, based on the thought that he's been here for a while, you had an interesting question about information sources. I think it'd be worthy of asking so that we can all appreciate how they gather information.
Yeah, so Eric brings us a lot of, and Ephraim brings us a lot of information because they're living in the middle of the Middle East. And I just, when Eric said that he'd been here for several weeks, my question to him was how has Western media impacted him during his time here?
Well, my response is that I haven't watched CNN once, or MSNBC once, or Fox, or I don't watch cable network news. I don't. I scan maybe once online the New York Times once or twice. The New York Times is totally, in my view, I don't know why anyone subscribes to that newspaper other than unless they trust its analysis of literary books. They want a book review, or they want to know what. So I don't read any of this stuff. There are certain sources on either Twitter or YouTube, and I listen to a lot of podcasts from like organizations, foreign affairs, foreign policy, and things like this. And even some of these sources I have to filter a bit in my own mind what they say. And so this is more of the sources that I listen to. Most of them are in English. The Israeli newspapers, look, during the war, the Israeli media did not do what one would consider a very good job showing the tragedies of what was going on inside Gaza amongst the civilian population, okay? And that's a fair criticism of the Israeli media. However, the Western media did, and every Israeli can watch CNN when they want, okay? Or Fox News, or BBC, or the French versions of these shows, whenever they want, because these things are available on the internet, and they're available in some cases over the TV networks. So there was a great abundance of seeing, the Palestinians crying or whatever in Gaza. So it wasn't necessary for the Israeli media to cover it. If you wanted to see it, you could see it. So the Western media, for the most part, in my view, is no longer credible. Personally, the only two, what I would call news reporting organizations I actually pay. And I've been a subscriber to The Economist, which is a British magazine since 1978.
Yep.
I've
That's a good one.
subscribed every year since then. And I often trust, I don't always agree with what they write, but I trust their intent and I trust the integrity of their reporting. And I was one of the earliest subscribers to what's called the Free Press, started by Barry Weiss, who left the New York Times. And they invite a reasonably wide range of people. It's not really a news reporting outlet. It's more of a analysis and opinion and interviewing operation. But they've done an incredible job of bringing in views that I think, and trying to bring in a true view of what's going on in the world, independent of what you see in Western press. The BBC has been so, their especially their Arabic channel is a free exchange with Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari-owned news outlet that maybe your readers or your listeners are familiar with, maybe not, but it's total propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's not as, it's dangerous because it incites many of the Arab governments in the Gulf and so on dislike it because it incites their population because it's so distorted and it lies so frequently about what's truly going on in the Middle East, especially when it comes to Israel. So the BBC has now been totally polluted and they've been sued. They've had to apologize. We track so many stories now that I don't see how anyone can trust it anymore either.
Yeah. Remind everybody, Eric, of your Substack, because that's worthy of.
Well, I would, but I haven't written in too long a time, so I'm not sure I really want to.
Okay.
Until I start trying to at least once a week try to post something. I'm not sure.
When you get ready to do that, we'd love to hear it because it's been worthy of following since you have such good information. Ephraim, what information sources do you tend to review?
Well, I'm with Eric on what I don't.
You mean you guys aren't watching our beautiful U.S. news sources?
No. As a matter of fact, when I do visit the States or in Canada, I'm at a loss. I sort of look at it for a while and I say, well, it's a little bit weird. Now, I used to run an organization called Honest Reporting. It was basically to monitor lies and bias specifically related to Israel and to bring that to the attention of the public. It's just it's crazy how much there is out there that is either blatant lies or.
Ephraim's too modest. That Honest Reporting does an incredible job. He's too modest to say it. They've nailed so many Western news media outlets for outright lies and distortions of the truth, and that's what they report on.
Yeah. So, and one of the biggest aspects is not even how they're reporting what they're reporting, but it's what they're not reporting. So, for throughout the Gaza war after October 7th, it was very quickly forgotten by many people consuming Western media what this war was even about in the first place. The massacre, the torture, the intentions of Hamas, the purpose of Hamas, their intention to do it again, that this is it completely got lost, that this was a defensive war against a terror entity that was determined to destroy the whole country in as vicious and brutal a way as possible. And it was like never brought up. And the only thing that was ever covered was lies about starvation and genocide, which are so easily provable by anybody investigating the area. It wasn't hard to find out how many humanitarian aid trucks were going in and what was going on in the markets. It was all out there on social media and Israeli press and stuff like that. But it was just completely ignored so that a lie like genocide and starvation could get spread. And of course, the fact that all the news from the region was coming from Hamas agents or people that, if they did not pass on the Hamas line, they would get killed and tortured. And that was who was being quoted regularly by mainstream press as it was a credible source.
Yep.
It was a pretty bizarre situation. I'll just give you like one, I like to make a specific, but one of the stories that was very, very widespread during the starvation campaign that Israel was being accused of starving everybody in Gaza, which was completely a lie, was there were a lot of pictures of people. And the New York Times had a cover story with the supposedly starving child. They showed this terribly emaciated child with the mother. And it turns out afterwards, they didn't mention this in the story, that the kid wasn't starving. The kid had cerebral palsy. But even more damning was it came out very soon after that the New York Times knew that. They knew it, and they had a whole discussion about, which picture should we include to illustrate the starvation. And then someone brought this picture up and they said, but that kid has cerebral palsy. Surely there's 1,000 other pictures of starving children that we can use. Why do we have to go to a terribly diseased child and use that? What kind of journalism is that? And that picture went all over the world, and it's just very, very typical of, agenda-driven journalism and reporting. So, this fits with our narrative. This fits with the message that we want to get across, and we'll just throw that in. Did heads roll? Were people fired at the New York Times because of that? And every other media outlet, I'm picking on the New York Times, but every other media outlet that carried on those lies and those pictures, they had such easy access to the truth.
Yep.
So it's hard to take them seriously, and certainly not to listen to them. It's a waste of time.
And reading through between the lines from what both of you said, you would have similar conclusions about media from both sides of the ideology spectrum.
Yeah, I don't watch Fox News and I don't watch MSNBC. I just can't trust reporting coming from any of these sources because I don't trust them.
We'd just like to, thank you two. The nice thing about you guys, you just give us the truth, including even issues, from inside of Israel that you bring out. We're just privileged. Our audience understands the privilege that we've got because we cannot trust our news sources at all. That we're getting, some real insight and truth from you two. And thank you so much that we have this privilege, and why we want to continue to do that. Our audience requested actually that they want to hear what you guys have to say. So in that regard, we talked last time about Iran. The country is having severe economic problems with runaway inflation, lack of water, lack of the ability to buy and pay for things. As you look at that, and it's not getting any better, what's your thoughts about how that'll play out? Because a population that is suffering, ultimately, doesn't that reach a breaking point? Since there's a lack of a organized group to step in, the United States, Israel doesn't want to step in. Talk to us about what you see could happen, might happen, and why they may happen, and where this thing could go.
I think inevitably people would expect the regime change inside of Iran, but it's not at all clear when. It could happen in 6 months from now or 6 years from now, and I don't think anyone really knows. As I mentioned in the previous broadcast, the leader is called the supreme leader because he has the absolute authority in the country. Khamenei, he's the second. Since the revolution in 1979, there have been two leaders like this, and he's the second. He's been reigning the longest and the most ruthlessly. That he will die in the next 6 months to 6 years, and that will be an inflection point, and things will change. Whether they could change for the worse, it's not clear how that will unfold. And I don't think there's any country that's interested in influencing or changing the dynamics of Iran. It's going to have to come from within the population itself somehow. And this government so far has been very effective at eliminating any possible leadership and organizational strength. Revolutions, like, if you think about the Russian Revolution, it took incredible organization and incredible leadership inspiration, and a lot of ruthlessness by Vladimir Lenin and his cadre. And that's what's needed for a revolution of this kind. And the regime has been very effective at finding and killing and eliminating this kind of leadership. So at some point, hopefully it will emerge, and then they'll do something in the country. But it's hard to imagine a Western-style democracy emerging at any point in the future. Most likely thing that would happen would be some form of dictatorship from either the army or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who hold the bulk of the power at the moment. But just to give your, listen, Iranians are a very well-educated population, and they get their own news sources. They have a way of getting satellite news and so on. And they also locally see things that in the neighborhoods that are populating the leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, you'll see fountains of water, flowing. And at the same time, people are told they shouldn't drink more than one glass of water a day. So people aren't stupid. They see this and they know it. And so this government has really no legitimacy in the eyes of the population. So that just means it's a matter of time.
Yeah. Rabbi, any thoughts about that whole process?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add in terms of like the current events and the specific, near future, but I will, as a tour guide, that's another one of my hats, is that the Islam appeared on the scene of the world in the 7th century, in like 638 or something. Muhammad created Islam, and they went on to conquer most of the world and much of Europe and the whole Middle East, and they were colonial conquerors to convert the entire world to Islam. So since then, Israel specifically, as a tour guide, so we teach people, that the Islam came, and as the colonial conquerors, they conquered our area, and they lasted for about 300 years until the Crusaders came. And then there was like a couple hundred years of back and forth fighting with Islam. And then Islam threw out the Crusaders, and they stuck around from about 1200 until the First World War, another 700 years. So we talk about that as the early Muslim period and the later Muslim period, sandwiching the Crusaders. But in between, literally every approximately 100 years, there was one Muslim empire that would come and kill all the leaders of the previous regime and overthrow them on behalf of another Islamic regime. The Egyptian, the Syrian, the Seleucids. It's so complicated, we never even discuss it as tour guides. But there has not been a lot of success in Islamic regimes lasting very long and very happily. So this is just another in that pattern of one Islamic regime probably going to be replaced by another Islamic regime.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
What will, you have a suffering population, doesn't there reach some kind of a breaking point where, they just can't survive, so to speak, and they have to do something, or the government, even the government that's there says, okay, we're going to do something economically for you. And, what will happen? They can't continue.
Oh, they did. They did. The government gave all the population $7. No, that's true. It's true. That's what just happened in the last week. They distributed everyone the equivalent of $7.
Wow.
So you would think so. I mean, history suggests that these kinds of things don't last. But I think most people believe that this regime won't last, but no one knows when or how it's going to get replaced. And when it gets replaced, will it be better or worse? History suggests that it'll be worse for a while until something triggers something, and I don't know what that will be. But to add something a little bit to Ephraim, there is a change now amongst using their great oil wealth from the Gulf states. They've transformed, at least for the time being, their societies and their economies in a very dramatic way. I'm talking specifically about the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, who in recent years have transitioned their approach to governing and everything to try to do what they can for the benefit of the population. That's not always true. There are other situations like in Egypt where you have over 125 million people living way below the poverty line, and it's not clear. I don't understand how the Egyptian government survives, but it does.
Do you foresee any movement by the United States, with an action like Trump just did with Argentina, where he removed the leader physically?
Venezuela.
Remove the leader physically, and is supposedly trying to reset up a new system. And I know that the protesters are appealing to Trump to come and do the same thing over there. Do you feel he would not consider it?
Well, I'm not one to predict what Trump will do. I've hard enough time predicting what he'll say, but I'm skeptical, and I think anybody who would advise him not to deliberately interfere, because it'll be taken the wrong way. And I think the Iranian people are certainly capable on their own to take care of their own affairs. So I think most people will stay out. One small correction, though, on Venezuela. Venezuela has actually a very progressive and, I hate to use that word, but I think it's applicable here, constitution that actually, if it was adhered to, would have an incredibly great society. The problem is that it had a dictator that was ignoring the will of the people in the population, and the its own constitution.
Yeah.
So there's no to use the word regime change for Venezuela is the wrong word, the wrong view. I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other whether the U.S. government did the right thing or the wrong thing. It's not for me to say. But what I will say is that what the U.S. government did was remove a ruthless dictator, overruling that was ignoring the will of his own people and the laws set in its own constitution in the way he ruled. So I don't know what's going to unfold, but I just want to make sure that was correct.
Yeah, that's an very interesting point. We'll see. See how that plays out. Ephraim, given the internal, economic problems and difficulties in Iran, will that lessen the ability to exercise terrorism against Israel at the moment? Well, is there kind of a release of that, so to speak? And does the population feel like, well, at least we have a moment of time here where it'll be less?
A brief moment. It can go both ways. Like, I think the long-term prognosis is the weaker the Iranian regime is in Iran, they're just less capable and more distracted. But on the other hand, it's one of their strategies is to distract their population by creating a common enemy, blaming all their problems on, the Zionist entity. So it could be that they'll grab onto that. And in general, they're just out to foment unrest in the region. And I don't even understand why, but somehow that helps these dictatorships when the more unrest and the more chaos and the more terrorism that they can promote, somehow it benefits them and they're out for that. So it can definitely sort of backfire and become a strategy to do even more attacks. But definitely, overall, the weaker they are, the better.
If you just look at it, the financial flow issues and the financial challenges. There's also funding this, which is costly, I'm sure. Doesn't this have the effect, and especially to the extent that the Trump policy starts overproducing crude oil all around the world and starts driving down the economics of, if that's sort of one of the things that's really going on behind the scenes to deal with inflation and other things, doesn't Iran become less important because it doesn't have the capability of financing these other efforts around the world that are anti-Israel, anti-American?
I think what you said is true, and I think this sort of dovetails into some of the strategies that the U.S. government had around Venezuela. Iran and especially the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, besides promoting and organizing these insurgencies and these proxies around the world, has a vast network of drug smuggling, and Hezbollah is an instrumental part of all that around the world. And Caracas, Venezuela, was one of the major pins. One of the podcasts I was listening to, they said there's a daily flight direct between Caracas and Tehran, and you can't book a seat on it because it's filled with Iranian Revolutionary Guard personnel going back and forth. Okay, so there's just an enormous amount of drug money involved in all this that's being profited. Maybe your listeners don't know, but during the Syrian civil war emerged a huge amphetamine infrastructure of drug smuggling that ended up being sold into the Gulf countries that caused a lot of issues within the Arab world. And Hezbollah was a big profiteer from that, as well as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that was doing that. So they've created it's all integrated, and the Trump administration, I'm sure, is aware of all this, and that's probably fitting into some of their thinking and strategy in the way they're handling these different situations. But it's very clear Venezuela was a part of this axis of evil, if you will, that was funneling money illegally and through using drugs, and through the Biden administration certainly shuffling agents of Iran and the cartels through the border with Mexico into the United States. I believe ICE has gone after, in particular, these Venezuelan gangs. I don't know how successful they've been. We'll probably know in a year or two when they start publishing numbers and getting rid of all these people that enter the United States illegally and are illegal and are conducting illegal activities as a consequence.
We sort of look at all these things happening around the world, and it's there is this sense of, hey, wait a minute, these things are not isolated events, and you don't want to give the idea that this was so well coordinated, but it's possible that this has been highly coordinated. And the thinking of this administration, and maybe even previous administrations, was that ultimately it's a multi-front effort, and especially now with the idea that economics can be used as a weapon so well. I see the Venezuela thing, and we were watching this buildup off the shore and how enormous the size of that buildup was. And this can't be just about Venezuela and about opium and cocaine. It's got to be much bigger. And what you just said, Eric, about these planes back and forth between Tehran and Caracas, I mean, do you have this sense that these are really coordinated, and even the timing of visits between the prime minister, between Netanyahu and Trump, you start wondering how many of these things are really being thoughtfully coordinated across the world?
Well, I'm a bit skeptical that Israel would have had much to do with the either motivating, or they may have some intelligence that they could have shared. But other than that, I'm skeptical that there was a lot going on from Israel regarding what was going on in the Caribbean and in Venezuela. By the way, I was a victim. I was sitting in the Newark airport trying to reach San Francisco in the middle of all this when the Caribbean airspace was closed.
Yeah.
And United Airlines used this as a grand excuse to delay all their flights. What a idiotic airline sometimes. That was the day of the invasion, or the capture of Maduro. So I don't know, but the Trump administration seems to be quite cognizant of how these things are interconnected, and that China has been making inroads into South America, which the United States has historically viewed as sort of its, through the Monroe Doctrine, as its backyard. And that was motivating some of the things they were saying about Panama. China was doing some things in Panama that enabled it to control both sides of the Panama Canal, which means trade. So this was being ignored previously, and the Trump administration seems to be proactively trying to deal with these things and preventing them. And I think, Denny, in the background, I think I agree with you. I think that there's we can remind your listeners that what ultimately brought down the Soviet Union during Ronald Reagan's presidency was the price of oil.
Yeah.
When the price of oil plummeted, it exposed that the emperor had no clothes.
Yeah.
That the Soviet Union was void of any real economic power of any kind. And if they do this again and they bring down the price of oil by starting to pump a lot of oil, because Caracas, I think Venezuela has been proven to have the largest oil reserves in the world, more than even Saudi Arabia. So if they just start pumping a lot of oil they can bring down the price of oil, and you're right, it'll affect inflation overall, but it will also bring the axis of the Soviet Union down to its knees again. Yeah. And Vladimir Putin will no longer have... What's keeping the Ukraine war going is the oil money that Putin is able to generate to pay for his mercenaries and to pay for all the arms that's able to buy or build from Iran and North Korea. There was a report, basically the Russians have run out of people to draft into their army of draft age. So they're going and hiring mercenaries. There was a report that in Jordan, the Jordanian government got really pissed off at Russia because it was going inside the country of Jordan, which is a neighbor of Israel, and recruiting people to fight its army on the front with the Ukraine, because there are people that are living in poverty, so why not, buy them? So if you bankrupt, the price of oil, then Russia comes to its knees again.
Well, thank you both for sharing. And one final question for you, Rabbi, is your tour business back? Is it operating?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for asking. It's definitely booming. It's it really snapped back really quickly after the ceasefire and the return of the hostages, and the old city is hopping and crowded in Jerusalem, and a lot of groups. In fact, I'm touring next week with a group of Christian intellectual writers and influencers, but tons of groups are back. I don't think we've quite returned to the height before, but business is climbing, and will continue to grow. But I guess it seems to reflect that there was a lot of held back interest, people that wanted to visit but were being held back by the war, and so now there's sort of a flood back in, and it looks like the summer will be really busy.
And is it the same place people are coming from, the same kinds of tour groups, or is there a new dynamic to people who want to tour Israel?
Well, certainly during the war for about 2 years, the only people who were visiting were really strong, committed Zionists and Israel lovers, Christians and Jews in that category. But casual visitors who just would look at Israel as being like historical or beautiful or exotic or good beaches, those people had canceled out. So now we're having a lot wider range of people that are visiting as is usual.
Great.
Well, I'll be one in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, see you soon.
We attempted, because I've led a couple of tours over there, to bring our leaders over, but it happened to be 2020. Israel shut it all down and said, you can't come. And so we haven't tried to come back. But we'll try to come back. We'd love to set up something with you to have Eric join us and bring a bunch of people to tour, but also to spend some time with you guys. So anyway, thank you so much for the insight. We're so privileged to have it. It's clear, and the outcome isn't clear. So that's going to be interesting to watch, about, okay, what really does happen? Where does the power shift, and what does occur, and how does that impact, the movement of the Middle East, and particularly Israel. So thank you so much, guys, for sharing, and we will look forward to catching up again. Eric, have a safe travel back home, and we'll look forward to catching up again. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.